It's 9:30. So when Rob gives you the okay, Chair, you can take it away.
Thanks, Heather.
I will be here for a while.
I think you're muted, Kim, or at least I can't hear you.
I have to put my headphones
All right, we are good to go here on the live stream.
Thanks, Rob, and good morning, everyone. This is the Hanover-Owen Sound Task Force meeting, January 15th. I'll call the meeting to order. Are there any declaration of interest? Seeing none, if one arises along the way, just speak up. We'll get right to item number 3 with a little review with our own Randy Scherzer. Good morning, Randy. You have the floor.
Good morning, Chair O'Leary and task force members. We are still in the process of finalizing the recommendations and opportunities summary from the last meeting that occurred on Monday. So we'll have both summaries provided for the Monday meeting as well as this meeting for the next meeting.
Okay, so we'll move on to number 4. And Randy, you still have the floor, speaking on Great County planning, current, future development opportunities and constraints.
Excellent. Let me just try and share my screen here. Just 1 second. Try that. And okay.
I always think when somebody's doing that, I can hear them very softly speaking. I'm thinking, are they disarming a bomb or what are they doing? Okay, just pull this wire here. Do I touch this? Do I? Boom.
Each one is slightly different. Like if between GoTo and Zoom and Teams, it's each one's slightly different. So I have to always figure out which one is which. So good morning again, and thanks, Chair Larry, and for the opportunity to provide this presentation. So can everyone see the presentation on the screen? Just to double check. Yeah. Okay, great. So just to give an overview of what we're hoping to present here today. So we thought we would give a quick overview of the policy framework that guides growth and development in the province and throughout the county, to provide a quick overview of the existing approval process and who approves what when it comes to development, provide some countywide development statistics and growth projections, including some preliminary results we've received from Hempson, who is currently working on the county's growth management study update. Identify some potential development constraints and provide a list of opportunities and initiatives for encouraging sustainable growth and development. I should also mention that we are experiencing some internet challenges here this morning in our household. So I have shared my meeting presentation notes with Scott and Stephanie, so they may have to step in if I run into some internet challenges here. So in 2020, the province passed a new provincial policy statement. And the provincial policy statement essentially sets the policy foundation for regulating how development and the use of lands happens throughout the province. And when rendering land use planning decisions, planning authorities must have regard to matters of provincial interest under the Planning Act and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. All official plans must be consistent with the PPS. There were some key changes made in the new 2020 PPS, and one of those was with respect to the planning horizon. Previous versions of the provincial policy statement only allowed municipalities to plan and designate land to a maximum timeframe of 20 years, except for infrastructure projects. And the new 2020 PPS has extended that timeframe to 25 years, while still allowing for longer timeframes for infrastructure projects and employment areas. Planning authorities are now required to ensure that projected housing land supply is made available to accommodate residential growth for 15 years, and that was previously 10 years. Sedimentary expansion is another area where there was some changes to the provincial policy statement. So the 2020 PPS provides some flexibility for sedimentary expansions, including no longer requiring a comprehensive review for sedimentary adjustments when a municipality is adding land to a sediment area, but also removing other lands, resulting in no net change in developable area. Boundary adjustments still need to ensure prime agricultural areas are protected. And there is also the requirement to consider market demand as part of justification for settlement area boundary expansions. Applications for boundary adjustments can be municipally or proponent initiated, and all other settlement expansions still require a comprehensive review. In terms of employment areas, there are several new policy additions regarding employment areas to ensure that these areas are protected for the long term and to provide clarity when considering redesignating these areas. Employment areas are areas designated in an official plan for clusters of business and economic activities, including things like manufacturing, warehousing, offices, associated retail, and ancillary facilities. And planning authorities are now encouraged to assess employment areas to ensure that designations are appropriate at the time of official plan review, to plan for appropriate transition between employment areas and adjacent non-employment areas, to prohibit residential and sensitive land uses that are not ancillary to the primary use of those areas for industrial manufacturing. Lands within employment areas can be converted to a designation that permits non-employment uses without a comprehensive review, provided the area has not been identified as provincially significant or regionally significant, that there is an identified need, and that the proposed uses will not impact the overall employment area, and that there's existing and planned infrastructure and public service facilities are available. There were also amendments and additions intended to protect what's called the long-term viability of major facilities. So these are things like airports, manufacturing uses, transportation infrastructure and corridors, and waste management systems, as well as industrial sites. There's also been a number of changes in the past couple of years to various pieces of legislation that relate to the development process, including the Planning Act, Development Charges Act, the Conservation Authorities Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the LPAT Act, just to name a few. That's kept staff pretty busy in terms of reviewing all those different pieces of legislation for sure. In terms of county policies, so the county official plan known as Recolor Gray was approved by the province in 2019. And the county official plan does include minimum density policies for primary settlement areas. So for Owen Sound and Hanover, the minimum development density for new development is 25 units per net hectare. And the density for other primary settlement areas is 20 units per net hectare. The higher minimum density for Owen Sound and Hanover is to recognize the importance of these two settlement areas as regional hubs that contain a number of public services and facilities. There are regional commercial areas. They have recreational facilities as well that serve, all those facilities serve a wider population beyond city and town limits. In terms of net hectare, because the minimum density is based on net hectare, this means the total number of residential units per hectare, but excludes things like roads, school sites, parks, commercial sites, stormwater management ponds, and hazard lands, for example, or otherwise undevelopable for environmental protection reasons. So those are netted out, and we're just then left with what lands are then available for actual development. The county encourages new development to be in a form and density that's supportive of future transit needs. And this is in accordance with the province's transit supportive guidelines, or to develop a municipal guideline that achieves that same objective. The county official plan also contains policies that strongly encourage intensification within primary settlement areas and requires that municipalities develop what we call intensification strategies to ensure that intensification targets are met. And intensification strategies should enable things like brownfield redevelopment, as of right permissions for second units, the development of vacant and underutilized lots, as well as the expansion or conversion of existing buildings. For Hanover and Owen Sound, the minimum targets for residential intensification is 15%, in that 15% of all new development should be from intensification. Similar to the intensification policies, the county official plan contains housing policies to support the creation of more affordable and attainable housing, as well as encouraging a mix of housing types and permitting second units, or encouraging the permission of second units as of right. The county official plan also indicates that it's important to design and build complete communities. And complete communities are about providing a mix of employment opportunities, local services, a full range of housing, public transportation and active transportation opportunities, as well as community infrastructure such as affordable housing, schools, recreation, and open space for our residents. It's about creating communities to support people's daily needs for all age groups. And it's about creating livable communities by providing an identifiable character, a sense of place, and a high quality of life. Recolor Gray also recognizes that natural and cultural environments are important aspects to Gray County and are reasons why many people value this area. So we need to protect these environments to benefit future generations, as they serve as important aspects to the county's rich biodiversity and culture. It is necessary to promote activities and developments, including development within our settlement areas, that work well with natural environment. It's always about balancing the need to support growth and development while protecting our natural and cultural assets that we all enjoy. In terms of the local official plans, so local official plans must conform to the policies in the county official plan. And the Planning Act also requires that the county has an official plan. However, local official plans are actually optional. With respect to primary settlement areas such as Hanover-Owen Sound, the county official plan policies generally defer to the detailed policies in the local official plans. Most municipalities are planning or are currently in the process of updating their official plans, and in some cases to align with Recolor Gray and the new PPS policies. And I believe Owen Sound and Hanover are working on updates to their official plans. In terms of existing plan approval authorities for planning applications, so the county is the approval authority for plans of subdivisions and condominiums, except for the city of Owen Sound. The city retained those approval authorities when they were a separated city prior to rejoining back with Gray County. The county is also the approval authority for county official plan amendments, for local official plans and local official plan amendments. For Owen Sound, only official plan review amendments, new official plans, and sedimentary expansions is where the county approves those. And the county is the approval authority for part law control bylaws, again, except for Owen Sound. In terms of local municipalities, consents are the items that local municipalities approve. This has been delegated by the county at time of amalgamation. Zoning bylaws and zoning bylaw amendments are also approved by local municipalities, minor variances, site plan approvals, and building permits. So now we'll just get into some of the development stats and growth projections we've seen in the last few years. So between 2016 to 2020, we've seen a total of just over 1,600 final approved lots units. There are currently just over 2,300 draft approved lots units. And the current active lots units in process are just over 1,000. And again, so these are the stats just within the last 4 years. So these are just new applications or final approvals or draft approvals that have happened between 2016 to 2020. So we have a lot of other draft approvals that are pre-2016 that are not included in these numbers. Approximately 5,000 residential lots units, therefore, are either final approved, currently draft approved, or in process in the last 4 years. And that's not including Owen Sound's numbers. Owen Sound, I think we had a rough number in terms of 2019. There was we think an additional 1,200 plus units at that time, either final approved, draft approved, or in process. We think this number has increased quite substantially, and I know Pam or Amy will be able to provide some of the recent development activities happening in Owen Sound. So we think for sure we're 6,000 plus units throughout the Gray County that have been either final approved, draft approved, or in process within the last 4 years. In terms of the residential building permit activity, so this shows building permit activity for each local municipality in 2018 and 2019, and also shows the types of residential dwellings as well. And this is based on the financial information return data that municipalities submit to the Ministry of Finance each year, or was obtained directly from the local municipality. And as you can see, Blue Mountains has the highest number of residential building permits in both 2018 and 2019, with Meaford being the second highest in 2018 and Owen Sound the second highest in 2019. Hanover saw a good amount of building permits in 2018, with less permits in 2019. And you can also see the trend of more multi-unit residential dwellings being built, with more apartment condos and row houses showing up in the data, especially in 2019. And Owen Sound is showing the highest number of apartment condo permits being issued in 2019. And this is a good stat to see for sure, as we know there's a need for rental apartments throughout the county. Oops, sorry, advanced too quickly. So the county is in the process of doing a growth management study update, and we've hired Hempson Consulting to update the growth projections and allocations. This is to take advantage of that new 25-year planning horizon I mentioned that is now in the 2020 PPS. And this will also help municipalities with their official plan updates to ensure that we're all using the most current and accurate growth projections. Council also wants to try to understand as best as we can how the pandemic may be impacting growth, because what we are hearing is that more people are choosing to move to the area on a permanent basis. And the question then is that just to ride out the pandemic, or is that actually them planting roots permanently, even in a post-pandemic era? We have only received some preliminary results from the consultant regarding the growth management study update. And these are draft, but we wanted to provide you with some insight in terms of some of the preliminary results we have received. So Hempson is indicating that there has been a significant uptick in population growth from 2016 to now, and the change was immediate and quite substantial. Hempson has noted that the recent rapid growth reflects a closer connectivity to the greater Golden Horseshoe and rapid development that we're seeing in the rest of the province in lakeshore communities. The indications are for sustained high growth in the near term, as well as going forward. So the table on the left compares the 2018 growth management study update and the 2020 growth management study update from 2016 to 2021. And as you can see, Hempson has projected that the county's permanent population in 2019 is over 100,000 people. And the projections in 2021 are 102,440 people, which is an additional 3,360 people that was previously being projected in 2018. The table on the right shows the household forecast, and between 2016 and 2021, Hempson is projecting that there has been an additional 3,340 permanent households.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Brian.
Can we ask questions as we go here, or what would you prefer?
Sure, go ahead.
Randy, if you could go back to that previous screen, please.
Yep.
Thank you. How does Hempson, and if you could give a real high level answer on how do they determine these numbers, or what metrics do they use to determine an update? I mean, anybody can throw a dart at the board, but there must be some rationale that they use.
Yeah, there's a number of factors, and Hempson will be able to explain this much better once they've completed the study and present. But my understanding is they look at things like previous building permit activity. So the recent uptick and update is based on actual permit data and stats that we have seen the last couple of years, which I previously showed in that one slide. There's been quite a bit of building permit activity, so that has a factor, obviously, in terms of not only the current estimates, but the projections going forward in terms of whether or not that's going to be sustained. They obviously look at the demographics too, in terms of and I'll get into this in a little bit too, in terms of, even though we have an aging population still, they're still projecting that we'll have a fairly steady amount of growth over the next 25 plus years. So, because you're factoring into things like birth and mortality rates as part of this permanent population projections as well. So despite even having still fairly low birth rates and higher mortality rates, they're still projecting an increase in population. And primarily that's being driven by migration to the area. People coming to this area, whether it be retirees or other families, just wanting to have the benefits of the natural assets that I talked about earlier, as well as other assets that we have here in the county that people are wanting to enjoy. So there's a number of factors. They've also factored in employment forecasts. So they're as part of this overall population, and they look at a number of different data sets. One that I'll show you in comparison to the Ministry of Finance is projecting very similar projections for our area. Those were just released last year. I think they pretty much align with what Hempson is now projecting and what Ministry of Finance is projecting. And speaking with Hempson has also helped the Ministry of Finance with those projections. So it's not a surprise that the two should at least align, because they're using the same data sources to determine these projections.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, if I might?
Sure, go ahead, Warden Hicks.
If we can go back to the slide just before that one. Yeah. So if we look closely, we'll see that they're not comparable. So in other words, if you look to the left of each chart, you'll see that one chart goes to 200 and the other one goes to 350. So it kind of skews things, but it's interesting when you look at that, because if we look at Owen Sound, Owen Sound's going from, a number somewhere under 50 in the 2018 chart to just under 150 in 2019, which is remarkable. And we're seeing a lot more increase as well in the black, which means the apartment and condo totals. But if we look at Hanover, this is really interesting, because when you look at the two charts, Hanover in 2018, just under 50, and when you look in 2019, it's even less, even though we've got some black showing up there a little bit. So I'd be interested. I know that Don Tedford is going to be presenting a little later in this meeting, but I'd be really interested in knowing why that is. And Owen Sound, quite remarkable. I mean, Town of Blue Mountains would be, excuse me, off the chart. But Owen Sound, what a jump from less than 50 to almost 150.
Yeah, definitely. And I looking at just Pam's and Amy's presentation that they put together, I think you'll see even continued increased jumps in Owen Sound. And I know in speaking with Don in Hanover too, and Don can speak to this better when he presents as well, that we're seeing, of course, continued increased activity in Hanover as well. And we know, based on previous discussions in terms of Hanover's, in terms of land supply and other things, that some of the challenges that Hanover's running into. But Don, I'm sure we'll be able to explain that in much greater detail than what I can at this stage, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that the 2020 stats will change things a bit, but it is an interesting story, and I'd love for Don to comment on that when he speaks, because I do wonder if there's a correlation between that drop that we're seeing, at least from these numbers, in Hanover, and the land issue that we're facing.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you want me to talk right now about that, Mr. Chair?
Let's just wait till you do your presentation, Don. We'll just stick to this one till we finish, and we'll carry on.
Thank you very much.
Great. So we'll go back to, so this is the next slide here. So this is, Hempson has provided household projections based on type of dwellings. And this is influenced by market trends, housing preference by the age of our population, as well as planning policy, has an influence over what we will see in terms of the types of housing. So the future growth mix assumes a shift away from singles and semis towards row house forms and apartments. And again, when we look back at that previous slide on the activity in 2018, 2019, we're already starting to see that shift. And in terms of apartment forms, this is projected to increase from 10% to a peak of 17% of our total housing in early 2040s. And based on the slide, like I said, we showed previously, we're seeing this starting to happen. And we're hoping that through some of the opportunities and initiatives that we'll highlight later on, that we'll see even more apartments and higher density based on some incentive programs and other things that the county and local municipalities are working on. This next slide is indicating that as I mentioned, the growth is being primarily driven by migration from Greater Golden Horseshoe, especially Peel, York, and Kitchener-Waterloo. Notwithstanding, as I mentioned, the faster growth, the population is still aging, and the age profile of migrants is older than the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which reflects a significant number of retirees to our area. So the table on the left shows the preliminary population forecast to 2051. And Hemson is projecting that the county's permanent population will be 126,500 people by 2051, which is an increase in population of just over 24,000 people between 2021 and 2051. The household forecast, which is the table on the right, to 2051 is projected to be 54,650 permanent households, or an increase of 11,730 households between 2021 and 2051. So we wanted to highlight some potential development constraints that could impact future growth and development, not only for Grey County, but for other areas of the province as well. And then talk about opportunities to try to address some of those constraints. So the first one is the development approval process. The development approval process is more complex and seems to be increasing in complexity with things like provincial policies, species at risk legislation, and other legislation requiring more studies. There's various permits required for various developments, including permits from conservation authorities and others. There are things like environmental compliance approvals and records of site condition required for certain sites and that are required from the province. And this can also create some delays based on what we're hearing from the development community. So in a nutshell, development takes time going through these processes to eventually putting shovels in the ground. Land prices have also increased quite substantially over the past few years, which adds to the overall development costs. Construction costs are also increasing, especially during the pandemic. We've seen these construction prices increase quite substantially. There are also labor pool shortages and not having enough skilled trades to complete builds based on the demand we are seeing. There are building supply shortages that primarily stem from the pandemic, and we understand that these supply shortages may continue for the foreseeable future until vaccines roll out and until we return to normal levels. Infrastructure to support development, such as municipal sewer and water and transportation infrastructure, is costly, and these costs continue to increase. And it always takes time to approve and construct this infrastructure. So it's always important to plan for the infrastructure needs in advance of what we anticipate for future growth and development that we anticipate, just to make sure that we have those approvals in place and that we're ready to go with construction when that is needed and required. Demand is also outpacing supply, whether that supply is available land or supply of housing. It just seems in the past couple of years, we can't build quick enough based on the demand. Mm-hmm. And the average home prices have increased with substantial increases in the past few years, with the average home price now exceeding the 500,000 mark and even higher in some municipalities. So there are a number of opportunities or initiatives that the county and local municipalities are either working on or can work on to help overcome some of these constraints. And the first is reviewing the current approval process and looking for opportunities to further streamline the development process using best practices and ensuring a consistent process across the county. The county has also received a request from the Town Blue Mountains to delegate approval authority for plans of subdivisions and condominiums and part lot control bylaws, which county staff are currently researching. We've also engaged counselors, developers, consultants, and local municipal staff, not only to get their input on planning delegations, but how we can further improve the planning process overall. There have also been a number of process adaptations that we've done, primarily due to the pandemic, that has resulted in improvements to the planning process. For example, the county now only accepts digital application submissions. So this saves developers and consultants both time and money and helps to reduce the amount of paper we consume and store. The county has also created fillable application forms, making it easier for consultants to complete applications. We have also gone to electronic public meetings, and this has saved time and money for everyone and has allowed for more public engagement as people are finding it easier to connect to a public meeting from either their home or place of work versus having to travel and potentially take time off work to attend. Encouraging things like secondary units or secondary suites as of right is another opportunity to encourage more affordable and attainable housing in our communities and to help achieve that further intensification that we talked about earlier. This also helps people enter into the market by helping to offset their mortgage costs by renting out an apartment in their, say, their basement or an attached addition to their house, or even in a detached structure. Another opportunity is offering incentives to encourage the types of development we want to see happen in our communities, such as the community improvement plan programs and development charge exemptions for rental housing and nonprofit housing that County Council approved yesterday, in fact. The county is also proposing a housekeeping amendment to the county official plan this year. So there's an opportunity to revisit some of the policies and to revise policies that may not be working as originally intended. The Affordable Housing Task Force has also developed an action plan that staff are in the process of implementing, and this will create more affordable housing as well as more attainable housing throughout the county. Because in order for an affordable housing project to be viable, we think it needs to contain a mixture of affordable and attainable units in order to be a viable project. County staff are also in the process of reviewing older plans of subdivisions and condominiums, and we're working with our legal staff to determine next steps for some of these really old plans. And in terms of really old plans, we're talking some cases 70s, 80s, and 90s in terms of these plans. So these could include options of potentially withdrawing draft approval for some of these older plans or attaching lapse dates, as well as working with those new existing landowners that may not even know they have a draft approved plan on their property to see if we can update those plans to better align with the community's vision and with the updated provincial policy framework. The county is also in the process of creating a climate change action plan, and there could be a number of strategies and actions that will encourage sustainable growth and development to help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions locally. Other opportunities and initiatives, we've got the cycling trails master plans recently completed, which helps to encourage and support more active transportation infrastructure. Our transportation service department is looking at the connecting links and updating transportation policies. We've got the gray transit route, or GTR, which is allowing more people to connect to various communities for various needs. We've got a DC background study update that the county is planning in this year, and we'll be able to explore new eligible services that are now included in the Development Charges Act, including housing services and long-term care. There's the age-friendly community strategy that we are planning to commence later this year. There is the Living on Main Street document that Scott presented to Committee of the Whole yesterday that was recently completed by master's students from the University of Toronto. Looking at downtown revitalization and opportunities to support maybe more housing in our downtown cores. There is the Grey Bruce Local Immigration Partnership that our economic development staff are working on to support newcomers to Grey County. There is the Municipal and Growth Boundaries Planning Initiative that Council has directed staff to further research to facilitate expansions of settlement areas that are adjacent to neighboring municipalities, and that will create what we're calling those win-win situations. There is the Business Attraction and Retention Initiatives that is being worked on by our Economic Development Working Group, which includes reps from each of our local municipalities. And there is that Growth Management Study update, which we highlighted previously. So this slide here just shows an example of the incentives that the county and local municipalities are working on through our community improvement plans to encourage the types of development we want to see in our communities. And incentives can include everything from tax increment grants, permanent application fee exemptions, development charge exemptions and deferrals, and surplus lands. And when you start stacking these incentives, this is where they can add up to quite substantial savings. So this is a scenario or an example where we have a 60-unit apartment building in Owen Sound. The total construction cost is just over $10 million. When you look at exemptions of both the city and county development charge, for example, that could add up to a savings of over $500,000. Assuming that the land cost is $400,000, and say if the county or the city owned that land and could offer that as surplus through a CIP incentive, the total potential savings could add up to close to $1 million in this scenario or this example when you start stacking some of these various incentives. So that concludes my presentation, and we'd be happy to take any questions that the task force may have.
Thanks for that, Randy. Great presentation. I always wonder about the trends in terms of, it seems to have happened so fast that Orangeville was busting at the seams, and then it's Shelburne, and now the housing that's going up in Dundalk. I guess you could say the same thing in Saugeen Shores and Blue Mountains. Is that trend going to keep coming our way to the point where we're no longer saying that this is just a retirement area? And also, maybe you could comment on what's the pandemic going to do? Is that going to force people this way or force them into maybe spreading out a little more?
Yeah, so in terms of the first question, I think for sure we're going to see that continue based on just the Hempson's preliminary growth results and projection results, is that migration will still be a large influence in terms of our population and our household forecasts over the next 20 plus years. We're seeing that still happen in a number of our communities. We're seeing it in Hanover, parts of Durham, Markdale, Dundalk. So even as you described, Chair O'Leary, in terms of going up the highways, so to speak, we're seeing that continue. Especially and going back to, I guess, into the second part of the question, in terms of the pandemic, I think as employers, allowing for further opportunities to be able to work from home, people then are able to then choose where they want to live. So if they want to live in a place where that offers great opportunities, recreational opportunities, hiking, biking, whatever it might be, they may choose those areas over being in GTA, for example. So I think we'll still see that trend for sure continue. The question still remains is whether or not the recent influx that we've seen, and whether or not if some have some seasonal homes here and they've moved here to either ride out the pandemic, the question still remains is whether or not that they are wanting to continue to stay here. Have they sold their place in GTA, and have they planted roots permanently in this area? That still remains a bit of a question mark. Hempson's still looking into various data sets to try to answer that as best as they can. So we hope to have some further results from Hempson on to help answer that second part of your question. But based on the preliminary results we've seen, we think that migration out of GTA, Kitchener-Waterloo, Guelph areas will continue based on the growth projections that Hempson is putting forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions for Randy? Warden Hicks.
So, it's interesting to talk about this growth that's happening, and I think we can project out fairly reasonably that as that growth happens, there's going to be increased pressure on primary settlement areas like Owen Sound and Hanover. But just commenting, we've got as a county several initiatives on the go, and it's nice to have these initiatives listed out on 2 pages. And I look at it and I think, man, we've got a lot happening. But for me, it's beginning to connect, almost like there could be a grandmaster puppeteer out there who says, these things are connected. So the growth issues are connected to the affordable housing issue. So here we are at the Hanover-Owen Sound Task Force talking about affordable housing, and then we see climate change playing a role in there as well. We have a climate change task force. So, should we be looking at this development and thinking about opportunities around, if we are going to be renovating our housing stock, should it be with climate change initiatives in mind? Should we be putting in policies around anything new, having to meet certain targets? So I'm really impressed, to be honest, with just how much we are doing as a county, and I'm just so proud of when I see it listed out like this. We're doing a lot. It doesn't mean that there isn't still much to be done, but this growth, I think the bottom line, it's going to put some pressures on our primary settlement areas for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I agree. Just being involved in some of the discussions with the Hanover-Owen Sound Task Force, it's been eye-opening for myself, as well as I'm sure the other task force members, and how it's all connected and interrelated. And I agree. I think there's a number of initiatives and opportunities that that we're working on, and which is great. But we can't then. It's almost stepping back and taking a look at, okay, these matters that we've been discussing with this task force, they're all connected, they're all interrelated. Are there gaps in some areas that we're looking at in terms of these opportunities initiatives? Are there other things that we can do both collectively between the county and local municipalities to try to address some of those other challenges that this task force has talked about? So I agree. I think there's a lot on the go, and there's a lot of great things that are happening. And then I think just based on the discussions from this task force, which will work its way into that final report in terms of other opportunities or continuing with some of these existing initiatives, but maybe tweaking them slightly to make sure that we're addressing some of those other challenges that we've heard from a number of organizations through this task force. So I'm excited for the final report. Staff have started to talk about it, and luckily, we've kept the recommendations and opportunities tracking that throughout. But it's going to be a daunting task to that final report, just because so many different challenges and opportunities, and then it's a matter of them prioritizing what council wants us to try to tackle, as well as with local municipalities, and how we can collectively work on trying to address some of those challenges. So, I don't know if others have anything further on that, but they're definitely all. It's amazing how they're all connected and interrelated for sure.
Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess, Randy, a concern in seeing those growth numbers, a concern I'm starting to hear from some people, and it's not loud, but I'm starting to hear it from some people, is a concern that what we're trying to do is recreate GTA here. You look at the style of some of the subdivisions, the density and so on, and I fully understand the reasons why we want that density, but some people are starting to have a concern that all we're trying to do is replicate the GTA here, and it's not gonna look pretty in about 10 years from now. I wondered if you could comment or talk to that concern a little bit, please.
It's a great point. And I think this goes back to some of the new policies we included as part of the new official plan in terms of complete communities. So we don't want to just create bedroom communities. We don't want to just create a cookie cutter subdivisions and development. We need to create that sense of character, that sense of place. And it's going to come through design guidelines and other things that we want to, and it could vary. It could vary for what it looks like in Dundalk compared to what it looks like in Hanover, compared to what it looks like in Owen Sound and Blue Mountains. The nice thing is that we have such a wide variety of different types of municipalities, and the culture and a wide variety of culture, as well as just we have recreational areas, we have settlement areas, we have agricultural historical communities. And so I think it'd be important to make sure that these complete communities and design guidelines and other things reflect some of that cultural heritage for those areas. That creates that sense of place, that creates that connection back to our roots, our cultural roots. So I think it's working between the county and local municipalities about how we can create those sense of places, how we can create those complete communities. We don't want to just create a bunch of housing units. It needs to have the commercial and recreational opportunities that will provide the residents coming to our area with what their expectations will be in terms of having the commercial and recreational to support those new residents. And so it's working with also the people that are moving to our area. What are their expectations? And then coming up and designing what we're calling those complete communities. Because we can't have just like you said, those cookie cutter approaches of subdivisions. We can't just build houses. We need to build complete communities.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. So let's not forget that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Desai.
Thank you. Thank you earlier. Quick question on this, and the point's been brought up, that we're all different municipalities, and it's been reiterated by Randy as well. Is there a benefit, and maybe not within the realm of this task force, but a benefit outside of it, to looking at centralizing all planning activities at the county level, rather than having each individual municipality do their own planning department? Is there a benefit to doing all of the planning at the county level? Is there a benefit to that, and should we be looking to move forward or move towards that?
Yeah, I don't know if I can fully comment on that at this time. I think there's benefits to working collectively between county and local municipal staff. And I think we've seen the benefits of just some of those initiatives that we just highlight of working collectively. I think because there are some unique situations, I guess, amongst the municipalities, it may be challenging to try to address all those different unique challenges across the municipalities. So to me, I think there's still a need for having county and local function. And it's just, I think, looking for those opportunities in terms of how we can further work better together would be my first starting point, or my first recommendation, I guess, would be. I can't speak on behalf of Owen Sound or Hanover staff on this call, but I think that's where we would be leaning towards. I think there's opportunities, because I think some of the, we always talk about ECDEV. I think Savannah was described as boots on the ground, right? So the county, I think we can provide that perspective of county-wide and helping support county-wide initiatives, but allowing some, flexibility so that some local municipalities can adapt it to their unique situations and to their unique municipalities. So And so the local staff can then obviously, because they're the the boots on the ground, so to speak, and closer to the ground and working with those in terms of issuing building permits and other things like that. I think, like I said, I think there's benefits of having both a county and a local planning representation. And it's just a matter of collectively working together to address some of the challenges that this task force has talked about, as well as other opportunities and initiatives that we can work together on collectively. Sorry, that's a long-winded, awkward response of a question that's very difficult and challenging, as you can well imagine.
Well, compared to the question.
Well, I was going to say we should get moving on here, but I did want to give Brian an opportunity. Just to be fair, did you have a comeback for that? You just flat out don't have any interest in that. Okay, we're all right. Okay, let's move on to item
Mr.
number
Chair?
3. Yep.
Sorry, I will note that Brian Teixeira has his hand up for a question.
Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During Randy's presentation, he mentioned that Hanover and Owen Sound have higher density requirements because our services, or because we have additional services or more services in these two municipalities. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that correlation.
Yeah, and I think this has just been highlighted even further with respect to some of the presentations that we've received through various organizations in terms of, a lot of the public services and facilities that people require are located in Owen Sound and Hanover. And as a result, there's some challenges and pressures that come along with providing some of those services and facilities, both in Owen Sound and Hanover. I think it's, to recognize that those Owen Sound and Hanover are, regional growth centers. They're the key regional growth centers for not only Grey County, but as well as parts of Bruce County, because we know in terms of Hanover, we've heard that there's a lot of people that live in Bruce County, but travel to Hanover for work and vice versa, right? So we know that those two settlement areas for sure have a lot of those public services facilities. And as a result, in terms of looking at a higher density of a minimum higher density for those two settlement areas, is to recognize that there is a difference between Owen Sound and Hanover and the other primary settlement areas. Will that change? That could change for sure. As we talked about, we're starting to see a lot more development and growth in Dundalk, for example. And as Dundalk continues to grow, and going back to that complete communities, will we see the need to have some more public services and facilities in a settlement area like Dundalk? And therefore, do we need to revisit Dundalk as another regional hub, not just again for Grey County, but we're starting to see more people even from GTA and from Dufferin County and others moving into the Dundalk area. So yeah, I think that could change, but that's primarily to recognize Owen Sound and Hanover as being slightly different than the other primary settlement areas. And as I mentioned, I think that's just been reinforced through the presentations that we've received through the organizations through this task force. So it is something that we're willing to look at and revisit. I think even the 25 units per hectare was something that was recommended previously by I think Hanover mayor councilors at the time when we were looking at these density policies back, I want to say it was 2010 or earlier. So it is something that we can definitely have some further discussions on. As I mentioned, we're doing a housekeeping amendment this year. So it's something that we're willing to have further discussions with Owen Sound, Hanover, as well as others in terms of those minimum density target and requirements.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Madam Clerk, we're okay to move on here. Are there any other questions?
No, sir. You're good to go.
Okay, we'll move to item B and move on to Owen Sound. Tim Simmons, our city manager, is online here. Tim, would you like to make the introductions, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair O'Leary, and to the members of the task force. So we've put together a presentation today, and Heather, you've got that, and it's my understanding you'll be able to get that up on screen for us.
Yes, I will. Just give me a minute.
And as Heather puts that up on screen, I guess we'll figure out the secret word for you to advance the slides for us. Anyhow, thanks for the invitation to share with the task force today. I've from a personal note, thoroughly enjoyed each task force meeting. You know, when I took on the city manager role here in May through the fall, it's been an understatement, a difficult time with COVID-19, but understanding and examining how our local governments and the county collaborate and support each other has been great. And I think the conversation leading into this Owen Sound presentation really has sort of hit the notes completely, that we certainly can accomplish a lot more when we have a common purpose and can work together. And I applaud the county council for striking this task force, for looking at both Hanover and Owen Sound and how we all collaborate together, because actions and information and decisions made at the local level have impacts to our partners, and sometimes they're known up front, and other times they're really, the impacts are unintended sometimes, and sometimes can be negative. So having a good communication line really helps a lot. So Heather, if I could have you advance to the next slide. Just for context, the presentation today is going to be presented by Pam Coulter, our Director of Community Services. And Community Services is our portfolio here in the city that includes planning and heritage as well as building. And supporting Pam today is Amy Can, our Manager of Planning and Heritage. So in context, Randy had mentioned during his presentation, Owen Sound does take on full planning services. So for members of the task force, we thought it would just be of note. You can see here sort of our organizational chart. We have Planning and Heritage Division. It's led by a manager of Planning and Heritage, Amy, who will be presenting, and she has 2 full-time planners with her and support staff. The other portion of this is the Building Division, and our Building Division, as mandated by the Building Code Act of Ontario, says that council must appoint a chief building official and inspectors that are necessary for the enforcement of the act. So we do have a Building Division. We have 1 chief building official. He's supported by a deputy chief building official. We have a building inspector, and we're also looking at bringing on another building inspector this year. Again, as Randy had mentioned, and Pam and Amy will take this presentation in a minute. We're really excited about what's going on here in the city, supporting not only our local levy, but the county levy, and the number of people that will be moving into new subdivisions here in the city. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy for the next slide.
Thanks very much, Tim, and hi, everybody. I am Amy. I'm the Manager of Planning and Heritage with the city, and I'm also the lead of the city's development team. So for your interest, the core development team is made up of city planning, building, and public works and engineering. The broader development team is made up of parks and open space, clerks, finance, and other internal city departments. And we would also consider the county, conservation authority, and external agencies as part of our broader development team. The role of the team is to streamline development approvals primarily. So we're establishing 1 point of contact for developers, both large and small. We stay with the project from vision to completion. So right from the very beginning, pre-consultation through to final approvals, we're with the project as a team. This ensures continuity, instills confidence in applicants, and it generally expedites the approvals process in each and every case. We put an emphasis on planning ahead, and we want to eliminate surprises for development applications wherever we can. And this is achieved through the cohesive vision of the development team. The development team provides comments on preliminary development concepts and formal submissions. involving one or more Planning Act applications. We meet with applicants in pre-consultation and informal application phases to discuss requirements and to answer any questions they may have. So this may mean one meeting, it may mean 10, depending on the scale of the project and the needs of the applicant. The core development team meets weekly on an internal basis to share information, to discuss development projects, and to work on special projects like policy updates, professional development, and process improvements. So through 2019 and 2020, over the last couple of years, we've worked hard to build and refine the role and cohesion of the development team. We like to believe, in part at least, that some of the success of the developments in the city are due in part to the hard work of our development team.
Amy, can I just interrupt you for a second here? We're still on the same slide. Did you want the slide to be moving, or you're still okay with this?
That's good. And in fact, you can move to the next slide and over to Pam.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Warden Hicks, task force members, and county staff. This is just some really neat facts for people who love numbers and to measure things. What I see when I look at these numbers, from roads to trails, are areas of common interests with Grey County and Hanover. I would point out the number in the bottom left-hand corner. Last year, we had 204 building permits and $66.4 million of construction value. Next slide. So that really was a banner year for Owen Sound in terms of building. Randy's touched on this a little bit, but construction value was up $6 million over 2019. And not since 2010 have we seen the numbers that we experienced in 2020. And I would point out in 2010, the numbers are a little bit skewed. That was the year that the permit was issued for the Julie MacArthur Regional Rec Center, representing about half of the value in 2010. So since 2015, the trend has been really positive in the last 2 years, really accentuating that trend. And all signs are that this is going to continue as we've got interest in properties that we have been working on sometimes for more than 15 years to see redeveloped. I've told the new city manager a few times since he's been here that he may be the luckiest city manager yet. So we're looking forward and excited about what's to come. Next slide. This slide just shows sort of a breakdown of last year's permits, and it's heavily weighted in that institutional category, which is the dark blue with $40 million of permits. And that represented projects like the Southbridge long-term care, Owen Sound Gardens, which is the Van Doler retirement home development, residential with 22 million. And that included projects like Odawa, the Sound Lifestyles development, as well as the addition of the additional story at Strathcona. Next slide. Really, the building permit fees mirroring the previous slide in terms of construction value. We collected about $700,000 in building permit fees, with over half of that coming from those institutional type developments. Next slide. One of the significant strategic priorities of council has been residential growth, and we had permits for 119 new units in 2020 and 145 the year before. These numbers, and I think one of the members had mentioned early on, I think Warden Hicks, that what we're seeing in Owen Sound in 2019 and 2020 far exceeded the previous 5 years. So certainly a new trend and a positive trend for the city. Next slide. The decision by council to initiate the municipal class environmental assessment and the servicing of the Sydenham Heights planning area has been critical in the new growth that we're experiencing. These are lands, I would note, that were annexed from the township of Sydenham in the 1980s to facilitate the construction of the of Grey Bruce Health Services. So this area is certainly the focus for much of the newer greenfield development. And the city front-ended about $2 million in costs to service these lands with sanitary and water. And these costs will be recovered through an area-specific development charge relating to the Sydenham Heights area. Next slide. So you'll see that this decision is really just starting to gain momentum as we head into 2021. And here you can see the top left is the Van Doler plan of subdivision. The one immediately east of the hospital lands, we call the Bremont subdivision, and then south of 8th Street, we've got the Red Hawk development. So things are really gaining momentum in the Sydenham Heights area. Next slide, and over to Amy.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to go through some key, primarily residential developments for the task force interests here. So first of all, we have the recently approved Odawa Heights apartment building. And this project represents the build out of the Owen Sound Housing Company's Odawa Heights development on 9th Avenue East here in the city. The recently approved apartment has 60 units, and the development has a total of 96 purpose-built affordable rental units in total. So as you likely know, the Owen Sound Housing Company is an important partner in providing affordable housing in this city, in this community. Next slide, please. So next we see the ANPET residential subdivision, as we call it, also known as the East Court Residences subdivision. This project was approved in 2020, and the subdivision will contain approximately 331 units in a mix of apartments, singles, semis, and townhouses. We also have Block 7, which you see the rendering here on the screen. That Block 7 contains a 126 unit rental retirement home for seniors. So that's a pretty exciting development, approved in 2020, as I noted, and construction is underway. Next slide, please. So also in that ANPET residential subdivision, we have what we currently call Block 3. So this is proposed to contain a 16 unit cluster townhouse development. And it's currently still in the planning approvals phase, but is anticipated to be a purpose-built rental development. Next slide. The Southbridge long-term care facility is also in the Sydenham Heights planning area that Pam spoke about earlier. It's adjacent to the ANPET subdivision, and this long-term care facility has 160 provincially licensed long-term care beds. So this is a great addition to the city's collection of residential units. Construction has begun for this development as well. Next slide, please. On 16th Avenue, adjacent to Southbridge, we have the Grey Bruce Vet Clinic, just an example of a greenfield development, a small commercial development here in the city. So nice to see some infill happening in 2020 as well. Next slide. As you likely know, heritage planning is an important part of the city's land use planning program. We work hard to preserve and celebrate our history here in the city, and we do believe that this uniqueness is important for our placemaking efforts. The project you see here, the applicant is proposing to remove the existing 1872 St. Mary's Rectory and replacing it with a new accessible rectory on the same footprint. This redevelopment conserves the historic landmark that is the St. Mary's Sanctuary. You see the spire there in the rendering. The sanctuary is highly visible on the East Hill from many locations in the city. Next slide. So the Gwyndon Apartments is a 3-story, 23-unit built rental project. The The project represents redevelopment of the property containing the former Mawikwadong Native Cultural Resource Center on 8th Avenue East. So Mawikwadong did move on to another site, which is important to accommodate their growth and their program. And then we see this site being revitalized. So that's great to see. So of note as well, the quality of this submission by the applicant and the work of the development team meant that this project received council approval within 1 month of formal application. So seeing the development team at work and seeing really great cooperative developers get their projects approved really, really speedily. So. Next slide, Bremont model homes. We do have the Bremont subdivision, which Pam pointed out earlier in that Sydenham Heights planning area. The subdivision is going through for final approval, but they have made arrangements and secured approvals for 2 model homes on the site. The model homes will be located on future subdivision lots and will ultimately form part of the broader Bremont subdivision project. So you'll be able to see those right from 8th Street. So those will be cool to see go up, hopefully in 2021. Next slide. 2020 saw approvals for the build out of the Heritage Grove Commercial Plaza on the east side of the city. The final phase includes a 100-room hotel and 4 detached commercial buildings containing restaurants and retail uses. So we do have a building permit in for a firehouse sub. So if anybody likes their firehouse sub, then you'll be able to get one in sound here shortly. And we also have, sorry, next slide, please. Approvals are in place for a 7-unit condo townhouse development on 9th Avenue East, just west of Zares. This is another infill project in a well-established residential area right on the commercial fringe. So one that represents, the tenets of what Randy spoke about earlier for complete community, emphasizing walkability, access to transit, and seeing more Owen Sounders be able to live life and live in their complete community. So that's kind of a cool one too. Next slide. The Hedera project contains 96 purpose-built rental units in total. It's located on 9th Avenue East, just north of 20th Street. Phase 1 of this development will be 36 cluster townhouses, which you can see in the rendering on your screen. And phase 2 will be a 60-unit apartment building. Next slide, please. A little bit of an older approval, but worth noting here that we are seeing life lease projects for 55 plus residents coming to the city as well. All but 6 of the Sound Lifestyle Cluster Townhouse units are complete, as you see here. The project contains 19 units in total with a community hall for residents. Next slide. And finally, from me, just a note on pre-consultations. Development team is working behind the scenes on an ongoing basis on a number of applications for pre-consultation. We see pre-consultation as being the most important part of a development project planning. Again, we emphasize our front end planning and making sure that we sort of set the scene and get it right before we're sort of, quote, too late in the development approvals process. So these pre-consultation applications are, of course, confidential, so I can't discuss them with you here, but it's worth noting that projects we have in pre-consultation phases recently in 2020 and ongoing include residential, commercial, and industrial proposals. And 2020, despite the state of the world, saw pre-consultations for long vacant properties being examined for development or redevelopment through the pre-consultation process. So these are always exciting things to see. So I will just note finally, next slide. On the industrial front that recently announced, we have the purchase of the vacant former Tenneco industrial property by the Peninsula Pro Growth Group. So this is exciting. The Tenneco building has been sitting vacant for some time. And that building is again getting requests for new tenants. So we do get inquiries for people looking for industrial space. And spaces are filling up in the city's industrial park. And for the first time in a long time, we actually are having trouble pointing people towards available space in the industrial park that's in existing buildings. So just interesting times in 2020. So we'll be eager to see what 2021 has in store for us. And with that, I will pass it back to Pam.
Thanks, Amy. Next slide, please. Randy touched on a number of planning policies, and we really do as planners believe that good policy makes good planning easy and leads to great development. In December, the city approved a new community improvement plan. It includes a menu of programs, and one of the main focuses of that community improvement plan update was to bring it into alignment with the county's CIP. So Randy had a slide that sort of showed how we can leverage the county and the city CIP toward a new housing development, and that's really great. Randy also mentioned that several municipalities with the county's new official plan are working to update their official plan, and our official plan update is underway. We have a public open house coming up this week. There's 4 policy papers on the website, and the draft official plan is there. And as Randy noted, the county will be the approval authority for this update. Next slide. So in terms of when we were asked about the presentation, it talked about constraints, and maybe a better way to look at it is really around opportunities. And Randy talked about the update to growth management, but as you can see, the investment in infrastructure in Owen Sound has been significant, with the servicing of Sydenham Heights, nearly $2 million, the $40 million upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant. And just in 2021, the water and wastewater capital program will be around $13 million. So as the county looks to update the growth management strategy, we really hope there's renewed support for growth in settlement areas like Owen Sound and Hanover that helps maximize this investment in infrastructure and reduce land consumption costs. The PPS really does encourage the integration of land use planning, growth management, and infrastructure planning. And the vitality of these settlement areas is critical to long-term prosperity. And decisions today really do need to consider the long-term impact and the protection of county, ag, and rural lands, as well as natural heritage. The county has been a real leader in terms of climate change and emphasizing, and Randy mentioned this too, an environmental lens on planning decisions would really be positive. In terms of one window county comments, we really do value the relationship and role, and Randy, you did a great job of fielding the question in terms of the role for both the county planning team and the city planning team. And the county team really does help staff here in Owen Sound make our best recommendations to council on development projects. In integrating county transportation comments within the county land use policy comment framework will really continue to be helpful as we move forward. In terms of county roads, there's quite a few county roads within the city in areas that we're seeing significant growth. So on 8th Street, all the developments that we've just gone through, but also on 3rd Avenue East, the planned redevelopment of the RCA lands. The ongoing coordination and land use approvals with capital works will be really important on these county roads as well. We have planned in 2021 the design for a major greening initiative along 3rd Avenue East within the downtown improvement area. So it's another opportunity to work with the county. When we talk about placemaking, I think this initiative will really be positive for the downtown. Urban growth standards, and Randy touched on this, but really applying these sort of similar standards for urban development around complete communities across the county. We see that as being really positive. Next slide. And lastly, housing affordability. Owen Sound has a fairly low medium household income. 20% of our residents live in low income households, and about 43% of residents in Owen Sound rent their homes. And what we're seeing, and this is pretty new data from the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, is 16% of homeowners and 49% of renters spend more than that magical 30% of their income on shelter. So the need for affordability is significant. And we've talked today about the things like the Community Improvement Plan, the DC bylaw with the exemption on purpose-built rentals, county housing, and I see Anne Marie's on the task force, the important role of Owen Sound Municipal nonprofit housing and Habitat for Humanity. But the Grey County Housing and Homelessness Plan includes some excellent recommendation. Our official plan policies will be really important, and there's a paper dedicated to housing affordability. And as we move forward, we talk about partnerships, and I think we're always stronger as we work in partnerships on some of these important initiatives. So that's the last slide, and happy to answer any questions or provide any clarification on the information as it's been presented, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so thanks to Tim and Amy and Pam. And before I move on, I should comment, Pam, I know you were getting some dental surgery the other day, but I didn't know you were going to end up with a black eye. But I must say, black eye or no black eye, you still look almost as good as your sister. And before
This
Milne
is a dangerous road you're going down, Mr. Chair.
No, before you say anything, I'm married to her sister, so I can say that. Anyway, with that said, there's lots going on in Owen Sound, and let's open it up for questions. Any questions for the Owen Sound crew? Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll make no comment on the video presented here today. However, I will say that the presentation has been awesome. Thank you to all three staff from Owen Sound. My question was around the topic there, or the issue that we've heard on some of these previous meetings about the influx of non-residents into the city. And we've heard it in Hanover as well, and I'm sure it occurs in others, some of the smaller urban areas. But do you anticipate some or all of the new residential development in Owen Sound making a dent in that influx, or are most of the new residential going to be non-employment residents, shall I say? I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, but do you get where I'm going with that?
Through the chair. So I might tackle that a little bit, and Pam and Amy, feel free to jump in. I think a lot of the daytime population number that's been thrown around, about the 41,000 people, will continue to exist. I think most of that daytime population are people coming in for employment, for education reasons, to also, as Randy has mentioned, and it's been mentioned throughout the presentations, they come in for the hospital and the other social service issues that are needed during those daytime hours. I think the new population and the new growth we will have will follow to an extent where the county's growth management studies looking at Kitchener area, Toronto area, there will be a new influx of people into the city. So our 24-hour population, I would see growing. And with that, even as the county experiences more growth, we will see our daytime population grow from, instead of 40,000 to 45 to 50,000, and our 24-hour population from 22,000 23, 24, 25,000. So
Okay. Yep. Makes sense.
Just to add to the comments of the city manager that actually we are just launching a work from home initiative. So that it's a marketing strategy that really is geared at residents of the GTA, Kitchener-Waterloo, who have realized through the pandemic that they can work from home. And it's a whole marketing strategy geared at attracting those residents to live and work in Owen Sound. And Grey County, it's bigger than Owen Sound.
Thanks for adding that last piece. Good. Thank you.
I wanted to mention too, this might be, Randy, you might be able to jump in on this one. That percentage, 43% of Owen Sound that rent. Where does that stand with the rest of the county? Is that comparable to Hanover, or does that kind of stick out like a sore thumb?
Yeah, from trying to recall some of the stats Brad was able to put together on the number of renters throughout the county. No doubt Owen Sound is the highest in terms of the number of our residents that are renting. Most of those are in Owen Sound. There are, of course, other apartments in Hanover and other places, but a higher percent population in Owen Sound is renting compared to the rest of the other municipalities in Grey County, from my recollection of those stats. But we can follow up with that too, and I for sure identify and flag that in the final report for sure.
You think that's a cause for concern at all, or no?
I think it's if we go back to it's related to some of the public services and facilities that I think that are in Owen Sound and that are offered in Owen Sound, and I think as a result, people want to be as close to those services and facilities as possible to provide access, because in some cases they don't have access to a vehicle. And so in terms of trying to keep their cost to a minimum, I think they're looking to Owen Sound. But as we've heard, that there's then some challenges that come with respect to having in terms of some of our residents in a lower income situation. There's other things that we see in terms of, whether they're struggling with mental health challenges, substance and drug abuse, etc. So some of those challenges are somewhat linked as well to all that. So there's challenges and opportunities in terms of we see though that where we have those public service facilities, we want to attract any new affordable housing as close to those services and facilities as possible. Because as I mentioned, in some cases they don't have access to a vehicle. They're relying on public transit or even active transportation to get to those services and facilities. So we want them to be as close to those opportunities as possible. But that, as we heard even on Monday, increases things like police costs. We've heard from mental health organizations that there's increased needs and from a mental health perspective. And so like the warden indicated, these are all interconnected and related. And so how we address some of these challenges going forward, that will have to come out in the final report in terms of those recommendations and opportunities.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Warden Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the staff from Owen Sound for making an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. And there's some exciting things happening in Owen Sound. Great to see. I wondered about infrastructure. I mean, with the growth that you're experiencing, infrastructure, I'm referring to water and sewer, I suppose. Are you in good shape? Or do you anticipate that there will need to be major investment? What is the state of affairs there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, both the water and the wastewater treatment plant have significant reserve capacity. So while there is an ongoing need for investment in infrastructure renewal, Our core infrastructure has lots of capacity to support the growth being projected in Owen Sound over the next 10 to 15 years.
Were you able to hear that? I don't know what Pam's volume seems to be very, very low. The last time it kicked in, did everybody hear that, or did you need her to repeat?
Probably.
I heard it, but I had to strain to hear it.
Right. Okay, any other comments or questions for Owen Sound? Nothing there, Madam Clerk?
No, sir.
Okay, let's move on then to Hanover. And from Hanover, we have Deputy CBO Brenda Getz and Director of Development and Chief Building Official Don Tedford. Good morning, Don. You have the floor. Maybe Don's on mute.
No, just having a nap.
Okay.
No, it was excellent to listen to the comparables there. So I think what happens in one settlement area happens at different volumes and different percentages, probably in all the settlement areas. But for myself, I'd like to thank the committee or the task force for allowing Hanover to talk to you about our current and future development, and also to talk about our favorite thing, which is called constraints that continually haunt Hanover in trying to do future development. So anyways, to look at last year's stats and comparable to the last 4 years, we had $36 million last year, which was substantially up more, probably our highest numbers since I've been here in 25 years. But in 2017, we also had over 30 million, which was, of course, a new secondary school that was worth $18 million. And of course, this year, we had a new long-term care facility also worth about $18 million. We totally, our permit fees collected were $470,000. Again, that's the highest number we've collected in those numbers. So as far as our dwellings go, I'll combine the two. Our total number of new dwellings is 60, of which 28 were singles and 32 were either towns or semis. And that's comparable. Last year, you looked at the numbers and that was commented on that it was lower. 2019, we only had 23 new dwellings, 12 singles, and 11 were towns or semis. That, for some reason, was a dip that I was considering normal and was hoping to see it maybe go for another 2 or 3 years with the trend going down. And I still today don't know whether it's COVID or retirement or people just wanting to move out of the city. But for some reason, we jumped all the way back up to 60. And there's a real trend for the semis and the dwellings and the towns equaling the same numbers as semis. So there's a totally different demand out there. And that could be, I don't see it here, but it could be city people moving into this area, but even farmers are moving into the towns and they're moving into the semis as well, the retired farmers. So it's a real mixed bag and it's kind of confusing with this year anyways. But my understanding is in the last 2 weeks, it's been so busy around here that I should mention the staff here. We have an administrative assistant that frontlines the counter and does all the application processes. And Brenda Getz does a great job of orchestrating that part of the department. We have myself, which does plans review, and we do all of the planning applications. We do planning administration. Owen Sound does planning plus planning administration. There's a big difference between the two, and it's always interesting to work in cohort. We hire our consultants, planning consultants as needed. We currently have 2 planning consultants hired as of now, working on different planning applications. And I'll get into some of them here today. Over the next year, we're trying to develop our official plan, which will lead into zoning requirements as well. So the total number of commercial this year, renovation or new, is 29. Last year was 28. And the year before was 34 and 20. So it's pretty well average. We have a certain amount of commercial industrial development that continues along with the same number of permits every year. As far as planning applications go, we've got 2 official plan amendments pretty well under our belt. We're starting a 3rd one now. We have 8 zoning bylaw amendments we completed last year, 9 consents, 6 minor variances, and we've had a total of 7 site plan agreements that were approved through council. And I'll get into them with regards to what type of development is happening on those site plans. So the actual number of permits is up substantially. And the trend seems to be, when you talk to the development industry, that it's going to continue to go that way. And with regards to our subdivisions, we have currently 11 subdivisions that are on the books in some different stages. We currently have 6 that are, or 5, I can say, that are in the process of still filling out. We have the Harris Pines, which is about 40% complete. Saugeen Riverside is 32 lots that actually was created 3 years ago and is now 100% complete. Every lot has a house on it. Parkside Subdivision, which continues at about 85% complete right now. It's an older subdivision, still has about 15% lots empty. Saugeen Cedar East is a brand new subdivision just created last year with approximately 105 lots, and currently it's got 30% of all of its lots. All the lots are sold, and 30% of them have a foundation on them as of today. So that's where a lot of activity is happening. The Brandy subdivision has 44 lots and is located directly to the north of Cedar East, and they're connected by roads. And so that subdivision right now is currently sitting at about 25% developed. It's a little bit more expensive lots there. They're a bit of larger lots. And then of course we have Saugeen Cedar West, which would be another 100 and a little over 100 lots. And that's the one we're having some difficulty with, the 25 units per hectare. And I'll get into that later on as well, because just to let you know, I think as a town, we support the settlement areas being at 25%, but only as an average. Having each subdivision with 25% starts to create every subdivision looking the same. And when you talk to developers, they're saying you'd have to put an apartment building in every subdivision in order to get the 25%, 25 units per hectare. And that would be keeping some of the development the way it normally is. Like when they come up where they're still finding, like our 50-foot lots or 45-foot lots, you get out of the city, that's 20 feet now. And it's a beehive down there. We're not a beehive yet. And I understand Councillor Milne's comments there, 100%. We don't really want to, but you're going to see it because provincial policies create provincial plans. We just have to somehow do the local management on it. So our subdivisions is a very busy part of Hanover. And again, it's just that attraction. And we continue with, like I say, we have a 10 total, but the rest are for a total of those 11 subdivisions sitting on our books. That's not over just 925 lots that are sitting there. And another thing, infilling is something that Hanover has had to do, whether we like it or not, because of our boundaries. For the last 45 years, we've had to do that. We're probably more experienced in Hanover, prior to me even being here, that at infilling. We'll put houses where, when I first moved here, I thought was totally unacceptable when I followed my Bruce County planning education. But anyways, it's turned out to be the normal now. The province has actually got it in their policy statements that we're to increase the use of our sewer and water, and we're to do this and do that. And you know, I haven't heard a lot of backlash for doing it. People are enjoying living in those houses. And we used to say you can go out and cut your grass with a pair of scissors. Well, you don't necessarily need a lawnmower anymore, but I've heard no backlash on it, and people are happy to be in those homes. And we've created over 100 houses in 40 years. That's a big subdivision without a subdivision. That's all infilling that has been done. So, and it creates a lower cost housing too. So the subdivisions are our current projects, that if I could get into those. We've started our Hanover growth, our local management growth study. It's a phase 2 we'll be having here shortly on Monday night. We have a public meeting for it. It also supports our official plan amendment number 3, which we're looking at what we call special policy areas. And Randy's quite familiar about that. We got this land given to us in 2000 during restructuring, of which was full of hydro corridor, swampland, hazard lands, rivers, you name it. It's just everything but everything other than developable lands. They gave us 1,000 acres that had 100 acres maybe developable. So now we're going to study that and make sure that we come up with, and we are showing that there's less lands available with our current studies. We're ready to go to a public meeting here within the next month on those SPA lands. And if you look at the town of Hanover, and I also looked at your Sydenham thing you're doing, and right through the center is this big green piece of land. Well, 30 years, 25 years ago, that piece of green land would have been about a quarter of the width it is today. Today, we're going to make a difference in what's going on around here just by the width of our hazard lands. Our hazard land in a subdivision that's in Hanover on the other side of the road that has hazard land on the other side is over 1,000 feet wide compared to being 100 feet wide. And that's just the nature of the beast, because the definition of the hazard lands changed on us and caused a lot more problems for us. So this study is in place. It's our number 1 current project in my mind. Of course, our number 2 project is we have the 128 bed long-term care. We've been working very hard at getting it started and very hard at finding the services for it. And again, we have to put it out on land where we have to come up with innovative ways of giving it water, sewer, and storm services. We down in our industrial park, we have a couple of new things happening. There's a new power store wanting to build there in the next year. We have 4 new cannabis retails. I imagine Owen Sound's probably got one already. We got one that'll probably be licensed within the next month, and then we'll get kicked off from there. We have a 45,000 square foot vacant manufacturing cannabis or marijuana facility, still sitting that way, and what'll happen, we don't know. But it's maybe now with the way they're developing the one in Owen Sound, maybe that'll start a trend. Who knows? But it's definitely something to try and meet the regulations with Health Canada. There's no doubt that that is an issue. We also have we had a second 10,000 square foot cannabis that was going to be hydroponically done with the current Cedar Crest fish farm. It's a huge fish farm in Hanover, and they were going to use the fish manure to actually do the cannabis. And that particular footings went in, building got started, and the primary investor had a serious helicopter accident overseas, and that project's just on hold or even not going to happen now. We have mini storage buildings. I imagine everywhere you go now, they want mini storage, but I've finally conceded that if you're going to put retirees or people from the city in a townhouse or a semi, they're going to need a mini storage. So there's a lot of them going up, and but you know, they can go in the country. They don't need water and sewer, but for some reason they want them in town, I guess, for services or for convenience for those people that are renting them. And I think another thing is security. Some of the ones I heard in the countries nowadays are having a lot of break-ins and vandalisms. People are starting to realize that when you watch Storage Wars or whatever it is on TV, that some of these places have valuable stuff in them. The other thing we have is our Butterball Turkey got expanded last year. We have we had a new 13,200 square foot office building constructed by Whiteman. It can actually house about 100 jobs in the telecommunication business. A new veterinary hospital. It was a big improvement over the one we had in town. It's still in town, but it's in our industrial park. And it's been a great addition and for Hanover, and it's completed and up and running. Beside that, we got a proposal right now for a new 8,000 square foot mechanical and plumbing wholesale building. That one is still in the process with closing the land deal. We've got a new office building that was just approved here last council meeting, and it's for a contractor that wishes to build a new office plus realty services, and it's located on our main street. Another interesting thing we approved was a church. We took the church and converted it to retail. It's located on busy roads, most churches are, and it's very nicely done. It's worked out very, very well, and it also accommodates a live-in dwelling unit as well. So those are basically the current projects that we're ongoing and doing site plan approvals on, and we have what you call an iron in the fire, and then we're hoping it doesn't get disturbed. Future projects we're looking at, and they've been ongoing for quite some time, as Pam indicated in her thing. There's some things just keep on the burner; they don't go away. We have a regional car dealership who's looking for 7 acres. That's like looking for a needle in a haystack when you take the town of Hanover. 7 acres is our primary problem. We have lots of, maybe not lots, but we do have commercial development that can happen on smaller lots. Anybody coming here with a big box or large regional type area, they're very, very difficult to find without assembling lands, putting lands together. And when you do that, you usually cause some sort of concerns amongst the neighborhood, whether it's commercial or residential. We have a Hope Church. They went through 4 years of official plan zoning and fighting with the neighbor on minimum distance separations, which we know they don't apply to a settlement area, an urban area, but our council has chosen to work in cooperation with our abutting farmers, which we do. And but anyways, they finally got approval to go ahead, and they've delayed it now. Yeah, they're not going to start anything for another 2 years. And it's interesting to note that, again, it's those things that are changing in the settlement areas. Is JDSS. This is a big story for Hanover. It's our empty high school. We currently have a developer in town that's already been to a planning advisory meeting. He's looking at his concept plan on the 11 acres is to take, we're going to extend 7th or 5th Avenue from 6th Street to 7th Street, which will actually give us a piece of road that we need or we require to take some of the traffic off the busy 7th Avenue. And it's got a sewer already underneath it, so we don't really have to go looking for some of the services. But that will actually divide the property into a subdivision on one side that'll have some singles, and it'll also have some multiple residential like towns or semis. The other side of the road now will leave the old school, which is going to be repurposed for 120, and they want to call them affordable housing. Well, we all know, and I know that's a big part of your project, and but where the settlement areas are going to see this is affordable housing depends on how much the rent is and what are you going to give for that rent. Are they going to have a room to sleep in where they share the washroom and share a dining area, a TV area, or are they going to try and put that all in each apartment again? That's when they don't become affordable anymore. So they're really looking at this, designing it, and trying to make sure that we can put together something that's affordable, attainable. And I had the luxury, and I've told a few people, maybe I've even told you, I had the luxury of going through the Hanover Inn, which is our old, now called the Forum on the main street of Hanover, with regards to a fire in the basement and people adding apartments to it. And in there is truly your homeless, the people that are actually needing a place to live, and they're not fussy. I can tell you that. I had the luxury to watch for a whole day of trying to unload this building, trying to make sure it's safe with the fire department and the police department, and watching these 21 or 22 tenants, the looks on their face was just something that you could see they were scared. They didn't know what they're going to be doing. They didn't know where they're going to end up at the end of the day. And they knew the modus operandi here was to shut the building down for safety reasons because of the fire in the basement that day. It ended up, we had a night watch put on the building, and they were allowed to reoccupy some 4.5 hours later. But for me to visually watch that, your job here is really big at what you're trying to achieve, and I hope you do achieve it. But if you look back 30, 40 years ago, we were probably housing certain people that way at that time too, in group houses or apartments that were constructed like that. I remember them as a child growing up in Owen Sound, that's just the way they were. They shared washrooms. I had friends that lived in them. So that's our thing. JDSS is, well, I don't know if it'll start this year, but a lot of planning is happening. We also have a multi-residential that wants to happen. The land deal hasn't closed. It's going to be a huge project for the town. Our CIP is in place now, and I'd like to thank the county and Randy and Scott and all them for their leadership in Savannah as well. I see her name on here somewhere. But we really do need incentives here as much as they do it in the city. And you know, they've been doing them down there for a lot longer than we've ever thought about doing it here. But our mindset now is that if you want the development to happen, you got to make it happen with a payback that'll come in 2 or 3, 4 years down the road and help pay everything back. And don't let that property sit there and continually be vacant for the next 20, 30 years. So our CIP is helping along with that. And that's our major future projects that we're looking at. We have other ones, and now I'd like to talk about the constraints. If I can just have a couple of minutes, I'm a bit over time here. I think our land mass is our #1 problem. If you look at a county map, we're just a postage stamp. And yet we represent the second most place for creating employment, jobs. We have a lot of jobs in town. And of those jobs, 50% of those people don't even live in Hanover. They live around Hanover. And that's a big number. So we had earlier on, we did another study in about the year 2000, and we had an awful problem with Walmart. For 6 years, they tried to get a permit from 1994 to 2000 between 2 municipalities, and with the county, they finally built in 2001. And that is something for a private company like First Pro or Walmart to spend that much time, but I guess it was normal. But they did finally get permission to build after a lot of roadblocks put in its way, not just from planning and government rules, but also between fighting with the owner of the County Fair Plaza and Zellers and all that stuff. I finally opened my eyes there to say, really, you know who's running this world as far as zoning goes, and that's the industry will put covenants on each other that they can't do this and they can't do that. And that really ties the hands of people trying to develop. So our 2000 study that we did showed Hanover was really lacking in commercial lands, especially large parcels. So we then initiated and did a little bit of a plan with the county towards West Gray with an official plan amendment number 122 that allowed us to have larger commercial blocks of land, but have never materialized to anything being developed or anything being done. And that was a very long, collaborative approach to trying to have developable land outside the boundaries of Hanover. What really kicked off a lot of our issues, the constraints, was that we had other industries looking in town for this larger parcel of land, 4 to 7 acres, let's say. We lost an insurance company that had 23,000 square foot new office building and 70 jobs, all well-paying jobs, ended up going to listable. We had a Home Depot all ready to start with a new 40-40 split pilot project, means 40 indoors and 40 outdoors, of a new type of hardware store, lumber store. They went on to Perry Sound with their pilot project, primarily with not being able to find a site. Those are two major ones. Our Canadian Tire here, I can tell you, I was here and watched them. They tried 3 times with hearings and site purchases to get 5 acres, which they finally built, I think, in 1998. There currently are unusable lands. We've developed them and expanded them right to our boundaries. Like we're exhausted, we're done now. And that's why, and when you reach those hazard lands, that's when the brakes go on. Nowadays, you don't go, you used to be able to kind of muscle or work your way into them with some agreements with the conservation or M&R, MOE. Nowadays, the hazard boundary is the hazard boundary. And they're really wide. They're not narrow anymore. In those hazard boundaries, we have a lot of things like the heritage features, which, and Randy touched on that, nasty little endangered species. Doesn't matter what we do in town, because I don't think we're 5 kilometers wide. Every new application has a dot on your map, and they do a 5-kilometer radius. And if there's one endangered species in that 5-kilometer radius, you have to do a study, or would they like you to do a study? And they won't tell you what the endangered species is either, or where it is, because there's been some, I guess, recourse to, or people trying to eliminate those endangered species. So it's a secretive thing you can't find out. But it really is a problem for Hanover. We had a meeting with M&R to try and resolve this, and we really never got anywhere on it. And we'll keep pushing that issue. As far as the settlement area goes, as I said earlier, Hanover will support the 25 units per hectare. We need to do that with our JDSS. We need to do it with our other people coming to town for residential. But it can't be on a per subdivision basis. It just creates subdivisions that'll start looking like Councillor Mullen said again, it'll look like probably the city of Toronto. And I don't think we want that. The intensification is now 15%. I thought it was 10. And I don't have a problem with that, because we've always been good at doing our intensification. So that's my take on development and constraints on developments. So if there's any questions, Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer them. And again, I'd like to thank my staff for the last 2 weeks anyways, of these crazy COVID and permits coming in like you wouldn't believe. I imagine you're seeing the same thing in Owen Sound. It's just unbelievable with this January 12th date of what happened to our offices, and then being kicked out of your want to work from home type of thing. So it's been challenging, I can put it that way. And that's why I'm verbal today too. So any questions, Mr. Chair, I'll be pleased to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Don. Appreciate that. It was a good presentation. There's a couple of things I was thinking about as just listening to you talk, and when you talk about the losses, reminds me of when we lost PPG, and I think at one point there was 700 or 800 people working there, and then more recently we lost Monroe, and for whatever reason, and I'm just saying this on a positive side, it has a way of turning itself around, and I think we're starting to see all of that come to fruition now. One of the things that you mentioned was, you're always talking about the land mass as being a problem, but you're heading towards a public meeting, and I'd be interested to know, I don't know if you want to answer this or Warden Hicks, but what's the idea of having a public meeting, and what's your long-term goal there?
The public meeting is required under the Planning Act whenever you do an official plan amendment. So we're following through on our regulatory requirements to have this public meeting. We're also having another meeting with regards to our growth management phase 2. That's coming up this Monday night. And then on top of that, when we get ready for the official plan amendment, that'll be for the SPA, which is special policy area. We have 4 special policy areas. We inherited those when we did our official plan amendment in 2001, after we annexed these lands from West Grey. We didn't annex, we restructured it, but they actually came from Bendick into the town of Hanover. So we were required, usually you're required within a year when you have lands moved into your municipality to redo the zoning and the official plan and bring it into the municipality. Like right now, when our annexation or our restructuring rules said the zoning will stay in place and the official plan will stay in place until such time as it's been redone by the town. And that's why we did them. So rather than do the studies back then, Chair O'Leary, we just put them into a special policy area. And now we're doing them some 20 years later. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, so Warden Hicks, now that Don has brought up the first dirty word, annexation, and I'm thinking amalgamation, and what is council, do they have the appetite to look towards something like that? When I hear his presentation of all your subdivisions that are 40 or 50% full and nowhere to go, at what point is council going to have to look into those dirty words?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our CAO is with us, so maybe I'll let Brian chime in at this point.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Chair, just for clarification first, the meeting on Monday, the 18th at 4 p.m. is a special meeting of council. It's not a public meeting. So, and the purpose of that meeting is to get an update from our consultants with respect to the growth plan phase 2. At this point, our consultants have been engaged for about a year, and they've completed a review of the special policy areas, including environmental assessments. They've also completed quite an extensive consultation with the counties, both Grey and Bruce, as well as Brockton, and we've attempted to engage West Grey. However, they haven't responded to, at this point at least, they haven't responded to our invitations to sit down and discuss our issues. So we've also engaged our MPPs as well as the MSO Office of Municipal Affairs and Housing in London. So there's still work to do. And at the end of that work, there will be it's already starting to formulate some of the options that are available to the town of Hanover. But at this point, council hasn't been asked to determine a definite path forward. So that'll happen, I would think, within the first quarter of this year, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Committee, is there any other comments or questions for Don Tedford? Warden Hicks?
Not a question, but I want to be very careful about what I'm saying because I have to wear a warden's hat, but I'm also the deputy mayor for the town of Hanover. But what you're hearing from our CAO is that we are able to sit with our neighbors to the west, which is another county, quite readily. And what a difference there, where they actually respond and we're actually able to sit and have a discussion. But we're not able to do that with a neighbor that's in our county. That is troublesome. And I know that it's a difficult subject, but there may be a role for the county in that, because we're in the same county, but we can't sit down with a neighbor in the county. That's problematic.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move on. Thanks very much to everyone for your presentations. Learned a lot today. We'll move on to item 5. Is there any other business? Seeing or hearing none. Our next meeting is February 19th. Is that right, Heather?
That is correct.
The only
Okay.
thing I'd suggest, Mr. Chair, is that the next meeting, the chair needs to wear a tie.
Well, I could do that,
Tidy up a little bit.
and I will consider that.
Thank you. At
Okay, do
least wear a Leafs shirt, okay?
I might do that.
All right.
Do we have a mover and seconder to adjourn? Councillor Milne and Deputy Warden McQueen. Is there anyone opposed? Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day. Have a good
Thank you
weekend.
all. Have a good
Meeting
weekend.
adjourned.
Bye now.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.